What's going on, everybody? John Stamper from John Stamper Media, and excited to be back for what is this third episode of the Spear Education Learning Series, all themed up around the idea of what keeps you up at night. And so as we wrap this particular learning series, as we're getting towards the end of 2023, there's nothing that I can think of that might keep you up at night when I think about the word profitability, right? And I think about something that I'm sure as a business owner, practice owner, you're thinking about often as you want to continue to grow your practice and take care of your patients and all of that. So I'm very excited and honored to have with me today Dr. Victoria Farr, who has been practicing for 30 years in Vacaville, California. Dr. Farr, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well this morning. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to have you. I know the Spear team is very excited, for us to have a discussion and have you talk about profitability, but we're going to get even deeper than that. And I think more importantly, as we wrap out this series on what keeps up doctors at night. But before we do that, we'd love to have you share with everybody a little bit about your history, your practice, the size of the practice, like all those good things to kind of frame things out for us.
Certainly. I'm super excited to be here and thank you for having me. So my husband and I have been practicing here together in Northern California, like you referenced, in a town that we're about 45 minutes northeast of San Francisco. And it's crazy. He's been practicing for 34 years and for myself, 31 years. And it's been an incredible journey. No doubt full of challenges and opportunities, to say the least. And I'm happy to be able to share some of the insights that I have gained along the way with my other colleagues.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a great way to get this started, you've put together some thoughts on the current state of profitability in the industry when we think about dentistry and really what's going on. I thought this would be a great way to get us started. And then we'll get into, some of your thoughts specifically, on how you've run your practice and of course, some insights for those that are watching. But yeah, let's go ahead and start there and have you, frame out a little bit about like what you're seeing in the industry as a whole.
Love it, John. That sounds great. So I think over the past 3 decades, John, I've seen a lot of different challenges that our profession has faced. But 2022 and 2023, I think, had brought many new challenges, the combination of which we have not necessarily seen before. So I'm going to do a quick recap of just the past 15 years, and kind of that'll explain everything a little bit better. In 2008, 2009, obviously during the financial crisis, we experienced one of the longest recessions that we've had in quite some time. And production in average offices was down about 10%. But there was not a lot of increase in overhead for the offices to impact profitability in a significant way. Then from 2012 through the pandemic, the US economy kind of began on an excellent run. Overall, I think dental practices were thriving, production and profitability was up, even though insurance reimbursements were often kind of stagnant. But again, an overhead possibly was increasing, but at kind of an acceptable rate. And again, that did not have much of an impact on the profitability and the bottom line. We all know, 2020 and what that did, so we're going to not belabor the point with that one. But as we came out of the pandemic, 2021 kind of ended up being an outlier year. In fact, an amazing year, I think, in terms of production and profitability for most of us dental offices. And I feel that that was as a result of pent-up dental demand that we already had through the pandemic, as well as the patients having extra capital and spending money that they weren't spending as they came out of the pandemic, but not necessarily due to specific changes in practice operations that we could perhaps repeat again. Then 2022 arrives, right? Boy, did the year come with challenges in a devastating economy. Skyrocketed inflation, higher interest rates, rising staffing costs, staff shortages post-pandemic, supply chain issues, higher pricing by suppliers. I mean, it is honestly scary when a box of glove that cost $15 ends up costing $75. That's like a 400% increase. And that's just on one item. And this all started contributing to a significant increase in cost of running a dental office, right? And of course, add the stagnant and in some cases, reduction in insurance reimbursement. Boy, that is a really difficult situation for most dental professionals. But now, with all that, as grim as that sounds, the good news is, with all of that said, in my 30-year experience, regardless of the state of economy, of the past, present, or what God knows what's going to come in the future, the dental office that has a plan and a clear vision and knows their numbers can succeed at some level during periods of economic upheaval, and certainly thrive when situations are favorable and ride that wave to maximize a potential profit, right? And we may not be able to do much about the state of economy, but there is a lot that we can do for the infrastructure of our offices to make it favorable as possible when situations like that happen. So I cannot emphasize enough to my colleagues that are on this call or see this, to get educated and know your numbers inside and out. But not knowing your numbers from a business perspective, but an accounting kind of point of view, because that's very different. You've got to know it from a business perspective. And I think, unfortunately, for most of us dental offices and dentists, we have not had dental business training. Profitability is what we see on the profit and loss statement that is given to us by our accountants, which is what I did before I got properly trained as well. And most accountants just tell us, they give us our P&L per month and they say, ideally, you want profit to be somewhere in the 30 to 40% of revenue. However, in P&L, that's basically used for a tax documentation. There is a lot of tax strategies embedded in that percentage, right? What I'm basically saying is that profit shown on the P&L is not how much money you have in the bank account. I would usually look at my own P&L and then I would look at my bank account and I'm like, where is all this money? Where is it? And this is why Spear Practice Solution doctors, myself included, are trained to use P&L for tax strategies and then use the expense worksheet system for cash flow and true profitability.
Yeah, what a great way to start this. And I have a feeling when I asked you this question, how you feel about it. But I wanted to ask you, what does profit mean to you when you think about everything that you just shared? And it's, you mentioned something very interesting, Dr. Farr, and that is that regardless of what stage a practice owner is in, when you do live in a little bit of that survival mode, or like you mentioned, there are a lot of outside factors that can make it difficult and challenging to grow a practice. It feels like profitability, when you get to the point to where profitability is something that you can focus on, that it's like a refreshing stage, right? It's almost like, oh, like I feel like I've been swimming upstream the whole time. And now like this is this magical roll of profit. So I think that's a great segue to ask you, like, when you get to that point, like what does profit mean to you?
Absolutely. I would love to share that with everybody, because true office profitability is kind of typically defined as the balance that remains when all of the business's operating expenses are subtracted from its revenue. So I think it's super important to recognize that in the SPEAR system of doing numbers and annual planning, that doctor's compensation, our draw that we get from the office, is part of the expense in the office and the money that has been paid out. True profit is what is left after you have paid all of your expenses, including paying yourself for working what we call in the business, right? The worker part of us gets paid and the entrepreneur part of us gets the profit. And then the entrepreneur gets to decide, what are they going to want to do with that profit, which I think sometimes includes reinvesting back into the office. It just makes so much sense. Whereas to me, the P&L didn't make a whole lot of sense because it was used for a different purpose. It was all Greek to me.
All right. So here is the question that everybody is wanting to know what you're going to say, me included. And that is when you look at your practice and you have to make a decision on the things that you're going to cut back on in an effort to be more profitable, how do you approach that exercise?
Wow, John, that's a pretty awesome question. Once you understand the true profitability, what true profitability actually is, then you can guide your expenses so that you can create the profit that you so desired. In other words, like everything else, profitability does not have to be left to chance and only exist as a result of cutting an expense, right? It can actually be controlled. It can be goaled and achieved at different levels by planning for it ahead of time. Again, it boils down to knowing your numbers and constantly monitoring them along the way, and not just at month 11 or 12 just once. You've got to look at it every week, every month, having some metrics to evaluate and see where you are, not only in terms of office production, but also in terms of expenses. Not only your take home, but also where your profitability is sitting that you want for yourself and your family. But as far as which expenses to cut, this is not a one-dimensional answer. It's kind of hard to say, cut back on X, Y, and Z, and you'll be fine. I think this requires a little bit of multi-dimensional thinking. And so, of course, what I mean by that is that there are two different kinds of expenses. And each item and category of expenses has a percentage of production. And it has a range norm and a goal for where that expense should fall. So when you know that range norm and you know your numbers monthly, the first thing that you do is you check to see if that expense percentage falls within the normal of what your normal range is that you have goaled for. And if it is within that normal range, then great, you don't need to worry about it. But if it isn't within that normal range, then you start getting a little bit curious to see why that is, because cutting is not always the answer. Let me give you an example of it. If the goal is to have your supplies be at 7%, that is the goal, and on a consistent basis, month after month, you're at 11%, it's important to know why. Because if that percentage is up because the team is frivolously spending or they are purchasing supplies that are not within your supply forecast, then that's something that you can monitor and cut back from. However, if the percentage is up because of inflation, and now it is a part of our new reality and a new norm, that poses a different issue, since it is not something that I can cut from, right? There's really not much wiggle room. In other words, it may not be very wise or cost effective for me to pay my talent and team member $30 an hour, put them behind a computer, spending hours to save me $500 at the end of the month by shopping around to find like a cheaper cotton roll package or an anesthetic, right? Whereas her talent could be potentially utilized elsewhere to make the production increase. So for me, in reality, John, it's been easier to increase production, to bring the expense percentage within the normal range rather than cut from expenses. Yep. That's been my experience in a nutshell.
Yeah, and we've both heard that saying, right? You can't cut yourself to prosperity. And I think that's a great segue on what you're talking about. Although I know we wanted to start there because establishing that foundation of what your operating costs are and your expenses is crucial. And again, as I'm sure you would attest to, Dr. Farr, like you'll come back to that, right? So like as you grow, the practice, continues to grow, you get to a new, revenue level, whatever the case may be. There's probably always going to be times you're going to be coming back to that expense strategy and the foundation because things will change and it's all relative. But that leads me to my next question, which is, talking about income and, raising your fees, but more importantly, like if you are going to increase your fees, let's talk a little bit about communication as well, with patients and how you go about that. So that's kind of the next place that I want to go. So let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on, increasing your fees and all of that.
What you said is so true, John, and that's the reason why we evaluate the expenses on an annual basis. So leaving that aside and coming to increasing fees and how we communicate it, same situation. I think except for a possible handful of years in my 3 decades in dentistry, we have definitely evaluated our fees and we have had fee increases annually. Because as we all know, nothing stays the same as the years go by. And of course, nothing that stays the same as the decades go by. So most often that increase in the fee for our UCR, our usual and customary rates, is not much. It's been somewhere around 3 to 4%. So let's say if a pro fee for us has been, let's just say $100 last year, it'll be around 103 this year. So even though that $3 is not a significant change per appointment, but it makes a big difference collectively over the course of the year, especially if you are evaluating and charging appropriately, not just for hygiene, but for any other treatment that you provide. So we revisit those numbers pretty much on an annual basis and adjust accordingly.
Yeah. And I guess one of the better things about a dental practice is that unlike a gas station, right, that has their prices out there all the time, and we can see that in a dental
Yeah.
practice, you don't walk into the waiting room and there's not a menu board. So again, it is, I mean, I'm sure that there are questions that come about, and that's the next thing I wanted to ask you is that, do you get questions from patients like about higher prices? And I think more importantly, like how do you and your team communicate that with them? Like if that topic comes up.
Yeah, let's go there for a little bit because we truly, honestly, like you said, because there is not a menu out there for them to know. Oh, last month my child came in and the cleaning was 100. Now this month I came in and the list is 103. We have not specifically been communicating fee increases per se, but we are certainly diligent about discussing fees for each appointment and reviewing patient responsibility and patient portions, if there is any, prior to patient appointments to kind of mitigate that situation and to kind of make sure that there are no surprises, because God knows there is nothing worse than having a patient in the chair that was surprised about the fee that they're going to be encountering, right? And honestly, we have not had a whole lot of issue with that part of it. However, as far as how do we handle questions on high prices? I can't tell you again that I get a ton of questions, but whether the question is about the price itself or anything else, we as leaders have to make sure that ourselves and our team are ready to handle those questions, whatever they are. And one way of responding to those concerns is by creating scripts, role plays, not to be mechanical, but rather be prepared for what those questions are going to be. The more practice we all have, the better we're going to be able to handle stuff on the fly. It's difficult to be bombarded with these kind of questions and not have the tools in our tool bag to be able to address them. So in my personal experience, John, if a patient is complaining about a fee particularly, the real issue lies in the fact that the patient is not perceiving the value for that treatment as compared to their investment. I think we all know iPhones are not cheap, and there is no insurance to help purchase it. But people somehow value it, and they find the money to get it. So if a patient does wince at hearing the fee that you're giving them, I think a lot of times it's the ideal spot to investigate a little further and learn about what this patient value is, right? It's kind of a dialogue that happens with a patient all the time, not just a treatment dialogue, but also a fee dialogue to be able to present cases based on their motivators and concerns, right? Often, when patients see the value of that treatment and the benefit that they're going to be receiving, oftentimes money problems kind of dissipate. And as a matter of fact, I think Spear Online has some conversation essentials that can be a great start for a lot of offices to kind of sit and contemplate. And then, of course, myself and my team throughout the years have collected a lot of real questions, and we have practiced on coming up with answers for them.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So you mentioned it. I want to get to your team. And I'm glad that we established the beginning of this conversation about what profit means to you. Because as you know, Dr. Farr, it means a lot to a lot of different practice owners. And the next thing I want to talk about is the correlation between keeping a happy team and profitability, and the things that you can do as a practice owner once you're swimming upstream. Not only are you profitable, but you feel like you're making great progress or what have you. You can definitely do things in the business to help it grow, and a team is such a big part of that. So let's start there. Can you share a little bit about bonus structure, like profit sharing, like some of those different things that you've done over the years that you do with your team to not only make sure the practice is profitable, but you're also, taking care of the people that are there on a daily basis?
By all means, definitely. Team compensation, John, like anything else in dentistry, is an evolutionary process. And a lot of that depends greatly on where a practitioner is in terms of their practice life cycle. And by life cycle, I mean exactly what you just said. Have they just bought the office? They're trying to break even and stay afloat? Or are they sitting solid in the middle and have abundance to share with their team? Or are they in the later parts and stages of practice and getting ready to maybe transition into a different phase? Profit sharing, I think, in each stage may look differently. At the way early stages of my own practice, once we were past the survival mode and my folded white chairs were put to the side, we did have what Amy Morgan so lovingly calls a communist bonus plan. Which what that means is everyone gets the same amount of quarterly bonus if we reach our goals for the month or for the quarter. And then something very interesting happened in my son's science class, which you may ask, John, what does that have anything to do with bonuses? But I'm going to share it because it was quite an aha moment for me, is that he had a big science project that was due for school, and they need to do a presentation on this project, and it was going to be a big part of their grade for at the end of the year. And my son Darian had put 3 weeks of diligent work to make sure that the project was done to the best of his ability. And then on the other hand, one of his classmates was gloating about the fact that he had put about 10 minutes into the project, barely the night before. And at the end of the day, they both ended up getting 100% and an A plus as a grade. And he comes home quite a bit perturbed about the situation and was kind of talking to me about the fact that he wasted 3 weeks of his life on this project, because no matter how little he would have done, he would have still ended up with 100%. Obviously, we're not debating whether grades are important or not over here, John, but rather that this story kind of delivers a profound message on the subliminal message that was given to Darian. How does this translate to our dental office? It's the exact same thing, is that if we've got a bell curve of team members with our superstars on one side and then our stragglers on the other side, I realized that if I am giving the same bonus to everybody and burdening my superstars for carrying the entire burden, then I'm incentivizing my talented superstars downstream, right? And then, and that's when we stopped doing equal bonus plans, just stopped it altogether. And the goal at this point became to have a merit-based package. We have used the SPEAR profit sharing model for that, which uses a certain percentage of increase in collection from the previous year to this year and places it into a pool of profit sharing bonus. And then each individual would get a piece of that pie in accordance to demonstrated development that they have shown, I think, during the year. To give you an example, so this makes a little bit more sense, is that if collections were 1,000,001 last year, they're 1,000,000 last year and 1,000,001 this year, there is an increase of $100,000. So we usually would use about 10 to 20% of that $100,000 and give that equates to about 10 to $20,000 in that pool. And then depending on demonstrated behavior from the team members, divvy it amongst. So it's not a equal share. But one thing that I want to say before I pass the mic to you, John, is that beware that lots of steps have to be in place prior to this model being efficacious. For any of my colleagues who are on SPEAR Online, there is a great module on compensation done by our one and only Amy Morgan, and that addresses a lot of the details. But many things such as job descriptions, growth plans, scorecards, they have to be in place for this process to make sense. Otherwise, it can be a little bit confusing and maybe perhaps even create a little resentment.
Yeah. And I think there are other things that I wanted to ask you during the year. Like you mentioned, looking at a practice at the end of the year, looking at that growth, having that be a part of the bonus, and then, of course, the merit piece. But are there also some other things during the year, Dr. Farr, that you could do to boost kind of the morale, but again, in the context of what we're talking about, are still positive to the bottom line. That they don't make a negative impact on the bottom line. Anything that you've used over the years that you can share?
Definitely, John. I think I can talk half an hour about this whole subject just because of the amount of years that I've been in there. But I truly feel, besides the excellence in the quality of dental care, the relationships that we build, the service that the patients receive from us as clinicians, our team members are one of the biggest assets, certainly my biggest asset in my office that sets me apart from any other office. And if I take care of them well, they will definitely take care of the business well, right? And this taking care of, like you said, John, is not always in terms of compensation or the package or the merit base, though that is a part of it. But there are a lot of soft benefits, I call them, that play a huge role in long-term loyalty and commitment of my team personally. A pleasant environment for the team, not a whole lot of turnover, where they are valued, they are acknowledged, they're challenged appropriately, offering small celebrations individually and collectively. To me personally, celebrations are huge. It builds kind of a connected team that is engaged and excited about coming to work. I'll give you some examples of the celebrations that we have done throughout the past many years, John. Mind you, I've got a ton of examples because for my husband, 34 years, and for myself, 31 years, which equates to being quite old. And it also means that it's important not to constantly repeat the same incentive over and over. Otherwise, it kind of loses its impact and its value for the team. We live close to the wine country. We're about 20 minutes away from Napa. And so we have done Thursday after work wine uncorking of the wine bottle, right, with a charcuterie board. And tell me who doesn't like a good charcuterie board, right? And sparkling apple cider for our non-drinkers, just to hang out and enjoy one another. We've done funny photo booths. We've done chili cook-offs. We've done lunch potlucks, evening pizza truck, shopping sprees, winery tours, bowling, mini golf, scavenger hunt. We've had dance-offs, and boy, let me tell you, our girls know to dance, and my husband had not a chance to stand against them. We've done popcorn movie nights, game nights, and then you start seeing the competitiveness come out of them, and that's really fun to see. We've done Halloween pumpkin carving contest. We've done Christmas tree decoration contest, and we've given away the Christmas trees. Pool parties, like I said, I can go on and on. But basically, we want to create an opportunity for everyone to engage each other without phones, without an agenda, without griping, without patient distraction. And this truly increases the morale and energizes everyone without actually breaking the bank at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's interesting when I kind of think about our conversation, we started with an overview just of profitability in dentistry. You established that foundation. You gave some insight on taking things to the next level as far as like staying ahead on the revenue side versus the expense side. And then, of course, these insights about your team is so valuable because when I look at where dentistry is, and I do look at a lot of the challenges, Dr. Farr, that that practice owners have had, there's no secret that has trickled down to their teams as well, right? The teams feel that. And so everybody's involved. And it sounds like you guys have done a really creative job in order to build that foundation. Now, this takes us to the next level, which is we want to get to the higher aspiration part of this practice to this conversation. That is, you want to continue to grow. Maybe you want to, add operatories. Maybe you want to have another practice, whatever the case may be. And so with that comes a lot of excitement, but also is going to come increased costs and things like that. So that's the next thing I wanted to get in with you is when you look at planning for increasing some of those expenses as you grow more, talk a little bit about how you've been able to manage that, especially if you got to a certain stage, you're like, oh, you could take a breath. You're like, oh, all right. Like, we're here now, we feel good. Like, but we want to continue to grow and there could be new challenges that come about with that. So let's go there.
That has happened to us so many times in the 30 years. The second that you feel you're on a good moving, you've got to step off of the treadmill. It's just how it is. And no doubt that expenses increase, generally speaking. There's no doubt about that. Whether you are purchasing a big item or not, expenses increase. That's just how it is. But it is also a necessity for growth in an office for us to plan and not stay stagnant. We definitely don't want to stay stagnant. If I did things the way that I did 30 years ago in the office that I first started, that would have not been very much in line with the vision that I had for myself and for my team and for my patients. So there are definitely a lot of ways to mitigate the expenses, though, John. First of all, I've already alluded to this. That's part of the reason why our fees are evaluated and analyzed annually and adjusted accordingly if the need is there. Having fees reflect what you are doing is super important. So if I have just am planning on purchasing an iTero or a cone beam or a CAD cam for next year, that has to be reflected in the annual plan and in the numbers that I'm going to do. So the second thing is that it is all about the annual plan, all about the annual plan. We have a proper forecasted annual plan that is ultimately supporting the office vision. And it's kind of based on the office expenses, the things that we want and the things that we need. And of course, it also depends on the schedule. How many days do we really want to work? Again, for every single provider based on wants and needs. When we have, or when someone has an annual plan and the expenses are accounted for in that annual plan, in essence, that becomes the North Star and a roadmap to use during the year. In accordance to the roadmap, you either spend or not spend if it is not in your plan and if it is not supporting your vision ultimately. And again, as an example, if you are walking the ADA floor and a salesperson comes up to you and says that their gadget, whatever it is the solution to all of your problems and the secret to the universe and your success, and that is not a part of your annual plan, don't purchase it. I won't purchase it. If I find value in it, I will add it for my next year's wish list. I add it to my expenses and I plan for it. And the opposite of that is true too. If I've always wanted a treatment coordinator to help me increase case acceptance, which bottom line is going to increase production, I will add her salary to my expenses as a forecast in the annual plan, and I'll make it happen, right? So it all goes back, John, to knowing your numbers intimately. That way, you're holding yourself and also your team accountable to that annual plan and forecast. And of course, again, we don't want to be mechanical. There's always things that happen. And in this 30 years, there has been unforeseen expenses that have come up. So we always allocate for a buffer or a contingency float in that. But that becomes an exception rather than the rule. So I think how we mitigate expenses is by having a plan and sticking to it.
All right. So you shared at the beginning of our conversation what skills or acumen a lot of dentists don't learn when they're in dental school. And I think we've established that it's a lot of these business principles that you have shared. However, for anybody that is watching, and I will share, my thoughts on this. I mean, it's been so impressive, Dr. Farr, just to hear you share this. And you have definitely learned a lot over the years of managing your practice, like from the business perspective, and you're so well spoken on this. And in my last episode, I spoke with Dr. Rachel Gold and Mandy, and we were just talking about the importance of a practice owner not feeling like they're on an island, right? And having these resources available to them. So, as we wrap this episode, I wanted to have you share with everybody, how does Spear Practice Solutions fall into all of this, right? Because certainly along the years, as you and your husband have grown your practice, you have had mentors, you have had these resources, you have had people along the way to help you, establish this level of success. So yeah, I'd just love to have you share, how SPS is really, falls into a lot of what you discussed today.
Definitely. I think, John, as clinicians, I have often said this, that we innately understand the importance of clinical continuing education, which obviously Spear provides the most amazing aspect of continuing education for most of us. And we know that developing our clinical knowledge and skill is is of utmost importance, and that is indisputable, no doubt about it. But we don't invest as much in developing ourselves as leaders, and the part of the practice that is all about the take home, the return on investment. And in this particular case, we're talking about profitability or any other pain and itch that we are feeling that could fall under the big umbrella of practice management skills, right? We just don't take the time to develop those skills that are going to make our lives easier and better as dentists and as business owners, as leaders, and it's going to make our team's life a lot better, right? So just as if our quality of dentistry that we provide is marginal at best, if that would be the case, that would be a problem. If our leadership and operating systems are marginal at best, you can't expect to have a high performance outcome or a team. And that's where SBS comes into the picture, to provide those needed trainings along the way to us, to our team, because it changes. At the beginning, the level of training that is needed is different than it is for a seasoned practitioner. I was at a class not too long ago, and one of the doctors in the course asked me, why do you still do this 30 years down the road? The reason is that I learn something new every single time, and I take my practice from where it is to the next level, which is a part of the vision indefinitely. So I cannot emphasize enough for the doctors that are on the call to stretch themselves and consider talking to somebody in SBS to see what SBS can do for them.
Yeah, it's such a nice connection. I think about so many of the younger dentists that are going to the, Spear, the campus events and things like that, and getting really excited about learning some new clinical skills, even more so than when they learned in dental school. When I think about the quality of Spear education on the clinical side, and then you marry that together with everything that you shared today, because as you know, Dr. Farr, it's like one thing to get excited about the dentistry that you can do. And then it's a whole other thing to make sure that you can run your practice profitable, do those cases, communicate with your patients to make sure that they want to move forward and get those cases done. Like, it's a whole other element of running a successful practice. And this has been so helpful. Again, like I think that as we wrap this series, everybody, on what keeps you up at night, hopefully we've got a lot more work to do in 2024, but hopefully you've taken a lot from the conversations I've been able to have with these great clinicians on, the same challenges that they face. The growing that they've gone through is the same growing that you're going through, and the same challenges or whatever. But it's really encouraging to know, Dr. Farr, that the Spear Practice Solutions is there, as a resource for dental practices to lean on. So any final thoughts as we close this out?
I think it is just such a joy to see that the best of both worlds, the clinical and the practice management, under one roof, which both equally contribute to the success of a dental office. And I really would highly encourage anyone, if they want to reach out, if they want to talk to me or a myriad of clinicians that have put that into practice, to see what the reality on the other side of it looks like, we're here and available for all of you guys.
I love that. Well, first of all, this has been an absolute pleasure. Congrats on the success of your practice, both you and your husband and your team, as you continue to do great work in dentistry, and you're still going to continuing education courses. So kudos to you on that. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Thanks everybody for watching. And the Spear team will have a lot of the information that Dr. Farr spoke about, and whether you're watching on social media or email or the like. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Farr.
Thank you, John.